We live in a world that teaches us to stay connected at all times. We're told that silence is awkward and that cutting people off is harsh. But here's the truth. There are moments in life when silence is our greatest strength, and cutting ties is an act of self-preservation. Body. Let's start with silence. We often mistake silence for weakness, but in reality, silence is a boundary. It's a way of saying, I am no longer engaging in spaces that drain my energy. When we stay silent, we allow ourselves to listen to our own needs, our own intuition, and our own peace. Now, let's talk about cutting contacts. That's a tough one, right? We feel guilty, we wonder if we're being unfair, but here's what I want you to remember. Not everyone deserves access to you. If someone continuously disrespects your boundaries, brings toxicity into your life, or makes you doubt your worth, walking away is not cruel, it's necessary. Healing requires distance. Have you ever noticed that when you remove yourself from negativity, you suddenly gain clarity? That's because growth happens in solitude. When we are constantly surrounded by chaos, we lose sight of who we are. Taking a step back is not avoidance, it's self-care. Um, Silence is also a powerful response. Sometimes people don't need to hear your explanation. They don't need a dramatic exit speech. They don't need one last chance to prove themselves. Silence speaks volumes. When you stop engaging, you take away their power over you. Now, let's address the guilt. Cutting ties does not make you heartless. It makes you intentional. You are allowed to choose who gets to be in your life. You are allowed to say, I deserve better. Letting go without guilt is a radical act of self-love. But here's the most important part. Once you remove toxic energy from your life, you must rebuild with intention. Cutting people off is not the goal. The goal is to create space for relationships that uplift you, that bring joy, that align with who you are becoming. Conclusion. So if you are holding on to relationships that drain you, if you are engaging in conversations that break your spirit, if you are afraid of walking away because of what others might think, I want you to remember this: silence is a response, cutting ties is a choice, and choosing yourself is never the wrong decision. It's not about being cold, it's about being whole. Silence is often misunderstood. We associate it with weakness, avoidance, or even indifference. But in reality, silence is a powerful choice. It's the ability to step back, observe, and resist the urge to react impulsively. When we are silent, we create space for reflection, for clarity, and for emotional balance. In difficult situations, silence allows us to regain control over our emotions instead of letting them control us. Choosing silence doesn't mean we are weak. It means we are choosing wisdom over chaos. Not every battle needs to be fought. Not every argument needs our response. When we engage in constant noise, defending, explaining, proving our worth, we often lose sight of what really matters. Silence allows us to maintain our dignity. It's an act of self-respect that protects our energy from unnecessary conflict. Moreover, silence gives us the ability to listen. When we stop talking, we start hearing our intuition, our emotions, and the truth beneath the surface. It helps us gain perspective before making important decisions. Instead of reacting in the moment, we learn to respond with intention. Silence, when used wisely, becomes one of the greatest tools for self-empowerment and emotional resilience. Not everyone deserves access to you, and that's a truth many of us struggle to accept. We feel obligated to keep certain relationships, whether out of guilt, history, or societal expectations. But the reality is that not all connections are meant to last. Some people drain our energy, undermine our confidence, or take more than they ever give. Allowing them continuous access to our lives is not an act of kindness, it's self-neglect. Setting boundaries is one of the most powerful ways to protect our emotional and mental well-being. It's not about being cruel, it's about being intentional with who we allow into our space. When we give unlimited access to people who don't respect us, we are teaching them that our boundaries don't matter. But when we decide who gets to stay in our lives, we take back our power. We stop settling for relationships that don't serve us and make room for ones that do. You don't owe anyone constant availability. Your energy is valuable, and the people who truly respect and care for you will never demand access at the expense of your peace. Prioritizing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for growth and self-respect. Healing is not something that happens in the middle of chaos. It requires space, stillness, and time away from the people and situations that have caused harm. When we are constantly surrounded by negativity, we don't have the clarity to see things for what they are. We stay stuck in cycles of emotional exhaustion, reacting instead of reflecting, absorbing instead of releasing. Absorbing instead of releasing, stepping away from toxic environments and unhealthy relationships is not avoidance. It's a necessary step toward healing. Distance allows us to reconnect with ourselves. When we remove distractions, we begin to hear our own thoughts more clearly. We start to understand our feelings without outside influence. We learn what brings us peace and what disrupts it. It's in solitude that we truly begin to heal because we are no longer shaped by external pressures. We are finally free to focus on ourselves. Healing also requires letting go. We cannot move forward while still holding on to the things that broke us. By creating distance, we give ourselves permission to detach from past pain, to process our emotions without interference, and to rebuild with stronger foundations. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about creating space for something better. Silence is often the most powerful response we can give. In a world that constantly demands our reaction, our defense, our explanation, our justification, choosing silence can feel unnatural. But not every situation deserves our energy, and not every person deserves a response. When we engage in unnecessary arguments, when we explain ourselves to those who have already made up their minds, we give away our power. Silence, on the other hand, allows us to maintain control over our emotions and our peace. Silence is not passive, it is a deliberate action. It communicates boundaries without the need for confrontation. It sends a message that we will not be manipulated, provoked, or drawn into negativity. Sometimes the best way to respond to disrespect, betrayal, or toxicity is simply not to engage. Moreover, silence forces others to sit with their own actions. When we stop giving attention to those who thrive on drama, they lose their power over us. It also allows us to gain clarity. Instead of reacting impulsively, we give ourselves time to process, reflect, and choose how we want to move forward. Silence is not a sign of defeat. It is a tool of self-mastery and strength. Letting go is one of the hardest things we do, and often guilt is what holds us back. We tell ourselves that walking away from certain people makes us selfish or unkind. We worry about hurting feelings, breaking ties, or appearing heartless. But choosing to cut toxic connections is not an act of cruelty, it's an act of self-preservation. Staying in relationships that drain us, disrespect us, or make us question our worth does not make us good people. It makes us prisoners of guilt. Guilt tricks us into believing that we owe people endless chances, even when they repeatedly show us who they are. But the truth is, we are not responsible for managing other people's emotions at the expense of our own well-being. We are allowed to put ourselves first. We are allowed to say, "This is no longer healthy for me," and walk away without explaining ourselves. Letting go without guilt is about recognizing that prioritizing yourself is not a betrayal of others. It's an act of self-respect. The right people will never make you feel guilty for protecting your peace, and When you finally release that guilt, you make room for relationships that truly nourish and support you. Removing toxic people from your life is only the first step. What comes next is just as important: rebuilding with intention. When we cut ties with those who drain us, we create space. But if we are not mindful, that space can easily be filled with the same kind of energy we walked away from. Growth isn't just about letting go, it's about choosing better. It's about being intentional with who we allow into our lives moving forward. This means surrounding ourselves with people who align with our values, who respect our boundaries, and who uplift rather than deplete us. It requires us to ask, what kind of relationships do I truly want? And to be patient enough to wait for those connections rather than settling out of loneliness or habit. Rebuilding with intention also means focusing on self growth. It's a time to rediscover what brings us joy, to strengthen our sense of self, and to cultivate a life that feels fulfilling without relying on unhealthy attachments. Cutting contacts isn't just about walking away from negativity, it's about making a conscious choice to fill our lives with authenticity, love, and connections that truly serve us. Choosing silence, cutting ties, and setting boundaries are not acts of weakness. They are profound acts of self respect. We often fear letting go because we confuse attachment with love, guilt with responsibility, and noise with importance. But true growth happens when we learn that silence is powerful, that not everyone deserves access to us, and that healing requires distance. Walking away from toxic relationships does not mean we are heartless. It means we are choosing ourselves. It means we are creating space for clarity, peace, and authentic connections. It means we are learning to let go without guilt and to rebuild with intention. And the world may tell us that we need to stay connected, to explain ourselves, to fight for relationships that no longer serve us. But we do not owe anyone access to our energy if it comes at the cost of our well being. We do not need to justify protecting our peace. So, as you move forward, remember this: silence is strength, boundaries are necessary, cutting ties is a choice, and choosing yourself will always be the right decision, not because you are selfish, but because you are worthy of a life that brings you peace. Searched reason